Welcome to SF Commercial Property Conversations with Bruce Bean, where Bay Area investments meet expert insights. Get ready to unlock the strategies of commercial real estate success.
All right. Well, today we have David Lynn with us, and David has gone through a number of iterations in the real estate world. So, David, it's great to have you. If you could just give us a little history of how you came into the medical world of real estate, so to speak. It's been quite a journey.
Yeah, well, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me, Bruce. How did I get into the medical real estate business? Before that, for a couple of decades, I'd been in private equity real estate, working for large, well-known blue chip firms in senior management. So, as managing director and partner, and I got a good glimpse. It was a great way to see and to work with many different types of real estate sectors. And so, yeah, there's some great, real estate sectors out there, multifamily, industrial, sure. I just like medical because it was a good balance between growth. It's, demand for medical grows every year in this country. It's also a very large sector, and it's ubiquitous. Medical is in all of our communities. It's recognizable. It has a real use value. Um, and it tends not to be so volatile, right? Because of that demand, rain or shine, it's evergreen. And then supply is, it's never oversupplied. There might have been one time in the early O's that it could have been potentially oversupplied, but then the global financial crisis happened, and it whipped it back into shape. So it just has very good fundamentals. It's kind of a low beta, low volatility sector. The tenant quality tends to be very good. Doctors and hospitals, and yeah, I mean they're bite size. They're not too big. They're not too small. Right. The average medical building tends to be between $10 to $20 million. So a lot of investors can afford that. Institutional investors can afford that. And It tends to be very good to aggregate because most of the properties are net lease. And so you don't have to be involved in every single aspect and be financially responsible for every single aspect of the building. So those are some of the factors. And I think it has sort of a good, investors like it because it serves a community. So, sort of that ESG quality, if you will. Right. It serves society. The governance tends to be very good. But it's also just a universal, non-discretionary type of real estate, right? We all need medical, right? You can't put that off. It's sort of like we all need shelter. We all need medical. So those are some of the reasons I went into it.
So, well, and the banks and financial institutions like medical also. So that's a nice factor.
Good points. They love medical. They love well occupied medical with high quality tenants. It's been a very good business for lenders. I mean, I think the default rate is probably the lowest, has the lowest default rate in this real estate sector, if I'm not mistaken. I think that's true. And Also, when I started 12 years ago, it was a very niche sector, so it wasn't overly competitive.
Mm.
The data are not that great, particularly back there. So in other words, it's not that efficient. So in order to make money, you really have to look for inefficiencies and exploit those inefficiencies. And so I had an information advantage when I went to a market, when I learned the players, the ecosystem of that market. And soon we got to learn that all across the country. And because there's not a lot of as much published data, you have an advantage there. Yeah, and I think it wasn't as crowded. It's gotten more competitive because it's an attractive sector, but it was not that crowded like 12 years ago, for example. So that was another factor.
Well, I'm curious if the medical world, like multifamily or retail or some of the other sectors, are there certain areas that you shy away from or you like to go to? I mean, Florida probably is desirable, but who knows? I'm guessing here.
No, I mean, the and another, I mean, just because we all need medical care, it's really, there could be many different markets. I like that, right? So that your canvas is much larger. You don't have to be crammed into a certain number of cities, the smile markets, etc. The top 8, 10 markets. No, but everyone needs medical, and most people have medical insurance as well. So it's sort of subsidized in that way too. So it's a little bit less coupled with incomes even, right? So and the job market and the local economy, because you have insurance and you need healthcare, right? So I really like that part of it. But in terms of good markets, better than average markets, I think sure, you want growth, you want population growth, economic growth, immigration, you want all those things, you want supply constraints. Those are always going to be attractive in any sector. So we have that. So yeah, we do like the Sun Belt markets. Sure, we like Florida, we like Phoenix, we like California, those kind of markets. But again, we like, and we've done very well throughout the country. In the Midwest, the so-called Rust Belt, the Northeast, the Northwest. A key, I think, is finding buildings with great locations who house great tenants, who are delivering really useful, really critical medical services, and we like a combination of private pay, so private insurance or cash, and then public pay, Medicare, Medicaid, those things. But yeah, we look to see what kind of tenants are our buildings. I mean, we know the specializations, we know the better. That's another factor. So some specializations we don't prefer as much. Others we do, that are really necessary, high volume. We also like surgery centers because a lot of what used to happen in the hospital decades ago is now happening in the medical outpatient building, including surgeries and surgeries that are very, very acute. So not just minor surgeries, major surgeries are happening now: heart surgery, brain surgery, back surgery, almost anything. So we look for that. That drives a lot of patient flow. So a lot of doctors depend upon that. They like to be right there in that building, in that ecosystem. And yeah, we look for national great operators or regional national players that have good brand names, that have excellent credit. Mayo Clinic, Cleveland Clinic, University of California, Baylor. Many like that. And I think that enhances the perception of the value of the portfolio, right? When you have those kind of quality names and credit in your portfolio. So no, it's generally, I'd say our MO in terms of location would be infill, affluent suburban markets, right? Where we're not in a city where it's crowded, it's hard to park, it could be some crime issues, whatever. So we like to serve, buy our buildings, have our buildings where people are, in their suburbs, and where the building format for medical outpatient buildings is much more convenient, we feel, than a traditional urban hospital. You can drive to it, you can park there very easily. Doesn't usually have medical services, emergency or medical, or very severe emergency cases. Our buildings don't have that, so it's a little bit less stressful if you're going in for an appointment. You don't have a poor guy who's just been run over by a car in the emergency room. It can be, we think our buildings are a pleasant experience, and that's the way it should be. When you're seeking medical care, you should try to minimize the stress. It should be an easy format, and these are often in retail centers or where people like to go, right? And they're visible. They're not like a hodgepodge of organic buildings like a lot of hospitals are. I remember going to Harvard, Mass General in Boston. I remember just trying to find my way when I was in MIT. I was trying to go there for some appointment. I couldn't find my way through the whole building. It was like
Yeah, some mess. Yeah.
I hate to see what happens when you don't have that. If you're not ambulatory or you're ill. So yeah, I think it's a more modern format. Doctors also prefer it over hospitals, all things being equal, because they can see patients, so they have their own private space. They often own their own practice, and they this is where they can invest, in equipment, FF&E to be more efficient, to be more profitable. So, you know, a lot of doctors, if they're not general practitioners or, if they want to pay off their student loans, they really gravitate towards private practice and a specialization that's in demand and that's lucrative, right? So they often want to be near hospitals, and our buildings are near hospitals. They're in that agglomeration or medical district, if you will, where they're the clusters of different types of medical buildings, right? So you have this ecosystem. You have usually anchored by a hospital, and then buildings like ours, medical outpatient buildings, and that's what we really like. And our tenants, our doctors, practitioners prefer that because they get patient flow referrals right from the hospital. They get that branding, and they do use some of those facilities sometimes, right? So that's very useful. So if you're a doctor, typically you want a shingle in the hospital, and then you're on private practice, in your MRB, in your nice beautiful MRB that we manage very well. And again, it's where patients have been, just follow the patient. That's where they've been going to over the years, really away from the hospital experience. And a lot of data have come out that it's not safe to have an extended hospital stay. Your rate of infection
Right.
increases dramatically. So you want to be infection free, and you want to be on your out of that hospital as soon as you can. So that's where MOBs have really hit their stride. It's just a confluence of very positive factors. So I think the trend is continuing. Hospitals won't disappear, I don't think, but certainly the MOB, just checks a lot of boxes. And yeah, and again, if doctors want to optimize their earning potential, they usually go into private practice and a specialization in one of our MOBs. And hospitals often encourage that because they want to expand in MOBs as well, right? So they often own their own MOBs, and they own the practices, and they encourage doctors, hey, we have this building, you should practice there, right? Because they the same things I'm saying, they know that you want to follow your customer, your patient in those affluent suburbs. So we do a lot of business with hospitals. They're tenants of ours. We also buy from hospitals. Sometimes many hospitals are under financial pressure. That's no news to anybody when you hear about that. They don't usually they don't usually shut down. That's very, very rare, but they often do, cost cutting, restructuring. And what they often do, it's a sale leaseback situation. They'll come to us and say, hey, David, do you want to buy this building in exchange for giving, and we'll take back a very long lease, right? So we have the use and the control of the building, but you collect the rents and you manage the building, because we're not in the real estate business. More and more they're told, focus, be really efficient in medical care delivery. You're not real estate people. And so that's a great combination it's a win-win for both of us, right? Because we get the building, we get a great tenant, they get the use of the building and control of the building, but professional management, right? So and that trend will continue. We feel there's just a lot of pressure for medical systems around the country to be much more efficient. As we know, it's very bloated, very inefficient, very costly. And the MOB format is a way to be more efficient, right? Hospitals generally are less efficient and they're not as profitable. And so as private equity firms, more and more just investors buy into medical, they're driving efficiencies, and the MOB is definitely a more efficient format.
So I'm curious, do you have your own property management, or do you sub that out to third-party groups to do property management?
Actually, both. I mean, we do our own property management and asset management, but we use local people they work for us, but they're not a property, they're individuals, they're property managers. And
Oh, okay.
we do that because we like to find somebody local, not somebody that we ship in from headquarters and hey, figure out the market, get to know these tenants. Medical tenants, medical clinical tenants they're high maintenance way. I mean that in a nice way. But they're performing mission critical things, right? They're doing medical care, procedures, surgeries, you name it. They need a building that is of high specification, of high quality, and high performance. And so we'd like to have somebody there on site or near the site And that's why it's imperative for us to hire local people who work for us. We're doing the property management, but we have a local person on the ground, and that's a key differentiator for us. And often they always know the that locale, the ecosystem, the vendors, the consultants. That's really, really important. If something breaks, you know exactly who to call. You know that plumber, that electrician. They know the building. They'll do a really good job. And also the relationship with the tenants, the doctors, right? I mean, they're again, if they need something, they need to have a good person that they know. So relationships are really important. They don't want to get on the phone to a service master, or, whatever.
Right. Yeah.
You come by Angie's List or something like that. Hey, this needs to be fixed right away. The lights are not working. The power's not working. The AC is not working. You need to fix it right away, and that's what we do. Right? None of our buildings are ever down on anything. If they are, our property manager is right on top of it, and he's right there at the building, right in that location. So that's a key differentiator for us. And a lot of our competitors don't do it that way. They'll take fees for property management. We do the same thing for leasing. The best leasing brokers for us are people embedded in that local market who have the relationships and have known these doctors, our tenants, for many, many years. The doctors are not people, they're very conservative, right? I mean,
Right.
about what they do, they have to be conservative. They've got to be really careful. And they're very careful about their own business, of course. So, when they're thinking about a building to lease one of our buildings, one of our spaces, that relationship. Hey, I know this local broker. I trust her. I've been working with her for 20 years, and she's always going to be truthful, and it's going to be a good fit, right? So, we take a little bit of the fee there, but we give a lot of that back to the local broker. We'd make more money internalizing that as well as property management, but it wouldn't be as good of service. And so part of our track record is, in terms of, overall returns, it's really in the hand to hand, in the trenches kind of work that we do, which is, be great for your tenants, have a great property, be very responsive, make sure that tenant fit, is great with our building. And that's where those local people really come in. And if you go to fly them in from headquarters, they're just not going to have the knowledge and the relationship that our people do. So that I think is a huge. Those aspects are a big part of why we have a very good leasing track record, very good renewal rate, well above industry averages, and where we can command higher rents too, because we deliver higher, better quality service, more responsive service. Our tenants don't complain. I've had roughly 750 tenants in 10 years, 10.5 years, and I've had only one tenant default, which
Wow.
to our underwriting. And I've had only maybe 3 or 4 really complaining, wanting tenants. And I think it was more of, who they are.
Right.
What it is that they have to complain about things. But, we, for that many tenants, that's a very, very small number, right? So that's less than 1%. So most of our tenants have been very happy. We do surveys and constantly calling and interacting with them. So that's another big difference. So some companies who buy, it's more of a financial transaction for them. So they'll buy the company, they'll buy a building, and then they'll ship their own people in. And they're not looking at tenant satisfaction and tenant fit with that space and tenant responsiveness. So we look at all those things, and that directly leads to higher renewals and higher rents. We purchase a building, for example, we do very extensive tenant interviews with all the tenants.
Mm-hmm.
We ask, how's your business going? All the typical questions. And what are your plans for the future? Do you like this location? Will you stay here? And how do you feel about the ownership? I mean, what's your relationship there? Well, who's the owner? I mean, half the time they don't know the financial acquirer owner of their mission critical building. That's pretty sad, right? And they and many times, okay, I know who the owner is, but they've never contacted me. I've never gotten a call from them.
Oh, wow. That's bad. So I'm curious, do you use Yardi for your property management software, or how do you keep it all under control, so to speak?
Use Yardi, use, even Excel at the property level. We, and yeah, it's, our buildings are net lease. So it's not like retail where you have 1,000 tenants in every building, or, lots of tenants in every building. Typically, we have, kind of one to 7 or 8, 9 tenants per building. So it's not too much, on a building basis. So yeah, we do use that. And then lately, we've been developing over the last year on AI tools, our bespoke AI agents. So we have one for property management, we have one for acquisitions, we have one for underwriting, we have one for research. So they've been incredibly useful, and it's really astounding how quickly that capability has developed, and that really puts us ahead of the game. I think, we're much faster, and I think, as long as you mind the machine, you have experienced people, managing those agents and really being very critical about what they, the output of that. I think you can be more accurate and just a lot faster, a lot more responsive. So uh, that's a huge game changer, I think, for the whole industry. And I think we're kind of an early adopter, but I think the industry seems to be really catching up now. But yeah, I mean, I think we've always been, early adopters of technology and research, and we have a lot of different data sources. And but that's a key part of our underwriting. Being you're really being as good as it's been. We do, I think, more than the average investor by a long shot. The data, the on-site review that we do and due diligence, the tenant interviews, the tenant canvassing. If we're new into a new location, we make sure we interview all the best brokers, leasing brokers, and property managers. And so we really get some of the best people, and we motivate them, with a lot of active management and rewards. So we treat medical buildings, as a pretty active asset class, not as a passive asset class. Even though, a fair number of our buildings are triple net, most of our buildings are triple net. We still, do a lot more of that than I think the average operator, and I think that's how you see, again, our results. That we care about our tenants because they're delivering amazing, an amazing service, right? Community healthcare, all around the country. So that really drives us.
No, it's incredible. So I assume your returns are better than average.
Yeah, I mean, if you benchmark us against NACREIF, we're over the last 10 years, we've been in the top decile in terms of returns, in terms of total return, in terms of current return, cash and cash return, and in terms of volatility as well. Our Sharp ratio is better than our competitors. I think that I know of in the MOB space, and a lot better than any other sector. So I look at the Sharp ratio, and I think savvy investors do, because it's not just the return, the overall return. I think industrials had a great run because of outsourcing and COVID, and multifamily had a great run too, for been very tight on housing, for a lot of different reasons. But if you look at the Sharp ratio, MOB, the MOB Sharp ratio is, I think, yeah, it is the best. I've got a research paper coming out pretty soon. Our firm is developing, but yeah, I believe the MOB Sharp ratio is the best of any real estate sector, and our particular Sharp ratio is better than that. So again, that's a measure of risk and reward. So those two things, Sharp ratio and the Sortino ratio. And I, because you really can't time the market when you think about it. I mean, you say, well, you just hit industrial is going great guns there. You hit a 30 IRR, last few years. Okay, well, great. Yeah. So do you want to exit now? No, we're going to hang in there. And now the returns are, they're pretty good, but they're nowhere near that, right? So how does one time the market? It's impossible to time the market. Therefore, I think if you can aim and achieve steady, good returns with kind of lowish volatility, if you have lowish volatility, and this is, I think that the two lowest in terms of volatility are MOBs and self-storage. I believe that's right. Then you don't really have to be as concerned about timing the market, not as concerned. And again, I think you because that demand increases every year. It's not only steady; it increases every year. That makes a lot of your returns much more predictable, right? But if your return varies a great deal, like hotels, for example, you can have a great year, everyone's traveling, everyone's, safe. You can have a terrible year, right? Some, geopolitical thing or the economy, whatever. And I think the name of the game is singles and doubles when you're trying to achieve, solid long-term returns, not to be the home run hitter. Most of
Right.
the big home run hitters in Major League Baseball don't have a great batting average, right? But they
No,
look good. That
exactly.
home run looks good.
Yeah, yeah, right. Well, that is very interesting. So I'm curious, given the nature of this market, it's I'm guessing it's probably hard to find people that want to sell.
I'm not really. I
Oh,
mean,
okay, that's interesting.
yeah, there are a number of trends. I think hospitals want to raise money to monetize their assets to focus on their core business, so they're selling. A lot of private equity firms go in and they're not long-term holders. They have achieved their returns, and I've worked with a few of those kinds of firms doing programmatic joint ventures. They've achieved their returns, they made a great return. They want to sell, right? They're not,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, they're getting out. Yeah.
And
They
then I think, yeah, then doctors are aging. A lot of boomer doctors are, retiring. It's not easy work to be a surgeon, to be on your feet all day. And so when they retire, they're eager to monetize their practice. They sell their practice and their building, right? And often they have junior people, junior partners, and they'll sell their practice to them and they'll sell the building to us. And then new buildings are being developed because there's increasing demand every year, right? So, and we're an aging population. The baby boomers, the whole population is aging, pretty quickly, and people don't get healthier as they get older, unfortunately.
So are you funding new development?
We can, our investors have tended to want, immediate cash flow, and we deliver that. So we present the option. We can work with developers all around the country. So we have those relationships, and often our developers are short on equity, so
Mm.
they're pretty happy to have their project funded in terms of equity. Um, but when you develop, MOBs are not huge buildings, but they take at least a few years. When it's all said and done, the entitlements, they're bespoke buildings, they're medical specialized. But it'll take, and you have no cash flow. You just have outflow for 3 or 4 years. So a
Right.
lot of investors don't want that. And the return, quite frankly, for a brand new building is not spectacular. It's usually pretty good, but it doesn't justify. It's not better than our returns generally for what we do. We add value. We're doing leasing, raising rents, all that. And being very strategic about the money we put into buildings. We don't overinvest. But when you're building a brand new building, a lot of those tenants who sign a board want glitzy, wonderful lobby and fancy things, and that adds to the cost. And yeah, so it's just not a big difference. In fact, brand new development returns are lower than our returns across the board. So that's why we don't really. But if we have an investor who just really wants a brand new building and for a photo opportunity on their annual report, then we'll say sure, we'll do that.
But it sounds like your ideal building is more 10 years old that's been stabilized, and then you can come in and add value from there.
Exactly. I mean, we love a track record. I mean, there's nothing better than having years of tenant history, right? We can see how profitable they've been, how competitive they've been, what they've invested in their space, right? That they're comfortable in their space, and they're happy there. They're not keen to move, or they can move. They have such a great business. They've got such great patient flow. They've invested so much in their space. They're in the right location in their local market. And you see all that with a track record when they've been there at least a few years.
Well, I assume you're not really interested in medical buildings that have been there for 20 or 30 years and maybe need, a complete redo, so to speak.
Yeah, exactly. We don't like buildings that are too old, that have a lot of deferred maintenance, that need to be updated, that might not be up to code. That just don't have a good appearance, curb appeal, those kind of things. Yeah, but we do buy older buildings, sometimes older than 20 years, when they've been renovated. So
Oh,
the medical buildings are kind of like a machine for healthcare delivery. And so if the interior has been, nicely modernized and renovated, then the shell is not as important, right? So if even if that looks a little tired, but the interior is the main thing, and the functioning is the main thing, and the safety code wise, those are the main things. So yeah, we do a number of those. But you'll find that a lot of doctors who've been practicing for a long time, they don't care so much about how beautiful their building is. Having said that, we have a lot of very attractive, aesthetically pleasing buildings. But your average, really good, profitable doctor tenant is concerned about the quality of healthcare, right? And the quality of their doctors, and you'll find that most patients, they have a long term relationship with their practitioner, their doctors, right? I mean, I think almost everybody has that. If you find a good healthcare provider, you tend to stick with that person, right? It's such an important relationship. And
right.
and so you don't care about like how beautiful the facade is or the lobby is, right? You don't need, abstract original paintings in the lobby, right? You just like clean, modern, efficient, and you see your doctor, right? And you can park, and there's a good path of travel, and signage is good, and we do all those things.
So I'm curious whether government regulations, government issues have caused any problems with your building, so to speak. I mean, there's been an awful lot of consolidation in the medical world, and I'm wondering if that's affected you.
Not really. I mean, you'll hear a lot about, and it sounds negative and sometimes even dire. Oh, this hospital's not making money, or this bank, it might go into bankruptcy, Chapter 11, whatever, and it might work out. And you think, whoa, there goes the hospital and all the related MOBs. There it goes. But what happens is that demand is always there. And
Ah,
demand always increases, and they usually and it's not our buildings, our MOBs usually are not affected at all. Um, but the hospital is just usually, reorganized. The cost cutting comes in. They might be unprofitable, but it usually doesn't disappear. It's usually just reorganized, and costs are cut. Either the hospital does go dark, which is really, really rare. I mean, that's so rare.
right, right,
They don't close the MOBs because our MOBs make the money, right? So if they have tenants, if the hospital has tenants in our buildings, they keep it running, because it's a moneymaker, right? So yeah, we're not affected by that kind of large hospital medical malaise that you hear about from time to time, and you've heard about that with a couple of REITs over the last couple of years. I won't mention their names, but they most of their portfolio has been owning hospitals, and,
Mm.
and then like that the profitability and the credit has really suffered, so they took a pretty big ding on that. But we don't. That's not what we do. Um, yeah, I mean, sometimes it'll affect the credit. Like if we have a hospital tenant and their credit is downgraded, sure, that'll have an effect if we're underwriting, and about to acquire a building, and it might the business. Look at our research, our due diligence. We've looked at this tenant over many years, and we can prove to you that they're efficient, they're profitable, they're thriving, they're growing. What's a credit rating? And when you have that operation in your building, and you've got a long track record of that operator, then that gives us comfort. In fact, yeah, we've never had a tenant blow out because of that, and we've had just one tenant default, and that was just because of his personal operations and finances, but it wasn't because of any kind of parent suffering, any kind of economic malaise or downgrade in the credit. But it does our investors will often tell, gee, they're concerned. I saw this today. This hospital's closing. I know they're one of your tenants.
Right, right.
Gee, what are you doing about that? Well, like nothing. They're not moving. They're really profitable. They're very happy. you know.
We're not bothered. Yeah. So I'm curious. So who is your ideal investor?
One with a lot of money. And
Okay. All right. We
yeah,
are, I mean, obviously you can, sky's the limit. What's kind of the lower end of the investment world?
well, we like to work with investors with at least 50 million of equity to deploy. And we do programmatic joint ventures. We don't do a fund, so I think that makes it easier for investors because they know what they're getting into and they have full information, full control. Actually, they can say no to any deal, and they have a lot of reporting on their properties, not just the fund, but their specific properties. So I think that makes them feel more comfortable. It's more work for us. But we need investors who not only have, I was being a little facetious, but certainly the equity has got to be there. It's got to be proven that, and they've got to be willing to deploy that if we meet their criteria, right? That's got to be, we do a lot of work. We're always sourcing deals, underwriting deals, and so it's not free. So when we put a deal to an investor, we want them to have all the information that they need. It meets all their criteria, but we do want a decision. And if they say no too often, then it's probably not going to be a good investor relationship for us. But one who understands the nuances of real estate and who knows, has some background and familiarity with medical real estate, medical care, and one that will, once we prove to them, if they're a new investor, that we're very good at what we do and we're provide all the information that you'll need, and we're totally transparent. We want that trust level to develop, so we're not under so many restrictions all the time, or we're not being second guessed. But it's kind of and also an investor that has more than hopefully 50 million to deploy, hopefully, 300, in a program that will last, many years. And then just not to be too nervous and knee jerk. And I think there's a lot of noise out there, and real estate's not the stock market, right? I mean, it's not like something happens and, the value of real estate is dramatically affected. That could happen in the stock market, right? Many, many examples of that every day, right? And I think some investors sort of, confuse the asset classes. This is not that. This is very slow moving. This has very low private equity real estate has very low correlations. Medical real estate, private equity real estate has even lower correlations, right? So, and sometimes you need to really comfort your investor, but sometimes they're never comforted, right? They're just knee-jerk reaction. They respond to all the noise, and but you have to go the distance. You have to be a longer. When I say longer term is not like 40 years. Longer term is kind of 4 to 5, 6 years minimum, right? And you don't want them to panic either. You don't want them to say, "Gee, we're in a major recession. Oh my goodness, the sky's falling. Sell." And that's kind of the worst thing to do. It's like a bunch of lemmings going over the cliff, en masse at the same time, right? And some people did that during the global financial crisis. Like, oh my God, the world is ending. They're listening to CNBC and Jim Cramer every day. Oh, and it's just don't worry. Medical is always here for you, rain or shine. We need medical probably more in hard times and in stressful times, right? We need it more. And that's been true, and it is evergreen. So you have to kind of talk them off the ledge sometimes, but sometimes they're, they listen to the crowd and the noise too much. And you got to say, look at history, look at this performance over many years, look at the Sharpe ratio. And, and look at, you hear about changes in healthcare insurance and, Medicare, Medicaid. And I've always been of belief that the government won't, cut those benefits too dramatically. They'll try to be more efficient, but it's a basic need. Any social good, it's very difficult. That's so critical. It's very it's, and you hear about the current administration wanting to revamp Obamacare. It might be revamped, but I don't think it'll go away. I think it'll just be revamped. And you hear about big private insurers, they're cutting back. Well, they can't cut back too much, right? They tend to just raise prices, but they don't really, cut, services that much. So, Yeah, when something's so critical and a fundamental human needs like eating, you need food, you need housing, right? There aren't too many things you really need, but you need those two, and you need medical care. Those are the
Medical,
three legs
yeah,
of the stool.
for sure. Yeah, right. So, well, this is I was going to say the slow and steady growth market, but actually, I think this is better than slow is kind of what I'm thinking here, that this is a steady market and very good returns. I mean, most docs are going to take a 5 to 10 year lease, so and most of them are able to continue for that period. So I think this is a very strong market. The more you talk about it, the more I like this whole area in terms of investments. So it's fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, I think the only downside is that um, acquiring new tenants, brand new tenants, it's not like instant, right? I mean, it really has to be a very good fit. And again, doctors are very conservative, and what they do is so critically important for them and society. That's got to be the right building, the right space. You got to be the right landlord. Got to be responsive. You got to fix things. You got to, put the TI in when they want to come in if they're brand new, and so people can't, come in and we often do, value add, light value add, and we'll buy buildings that are not completely occupied. And we tell our tenants this, it won't be 2 months. It'll be, probably a few years before we get this up to a certain level. 90-95% is typically what we aim for, or 100. But yeah, that whole, dance, the hand holding, the, all the things that you have to convey, and the trust level, it takes a bit of time. But the good news is that once they're in, they're in. I mean, if you treat them well, if you do your job as a very good, responsive landlord, and they're profitable, they're doing well, they tend to stay and they tend to renew. So in a way, probably higher than almost anything. Maybe not self storage. I always always trying to think of
Maybe,
yeah.
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 Yeah. Well, self-storage I've always felt is more of a business than a real estate play. But and to some degree, medical has a little bit of that same flavor, but it's much more of a real estate play than a business type of opportunity, so to speak.
Right.
So, well, this has been a great conversation. I personally learned an immense amount. So I look forward to talking to you again down the road and see how the medical world is doing.
Well, Chris, it was my pleasure. So anytime, I really enjoyed this, and I hope it's of interest to your listeners or viewers or both. Yeah, thank you.
I definitely think so. So where can people get a hold of you, David?
Um, you can Google me. I'm Googleable. I'm on LinkedIn, and my email. It's kind of a long email, but it's David at healthcareoneproperties.com. David at healthcareoneproperties.com, all stuck together.
Well, let's keep in touch and see how the medical world is doing in the next 6 to 8 months and come back and reconvene again.
That sounds good.
All right. Well, great to have you. I look forward to talking again in the future.
That's a wrap on today's journey through the SF commercial real estate scene. Ready to share your story? Visit sfcommercialconversations.com/guest. Your insights could lead the next conversation.